Hello again, guys, welcome back to another Big L Devlin video. Today we're going to be discussing paganism, and we're going to be discussing the topic of spirits that exist within this physical world. So states of essence that exist within our state of existence. Now, this is a huge topic, especially when you take into consideration communing with them, runes that work with spirits, and even travelling yourself to hell through the high seat ritual within Seder practice. But we must make a start somewhere. Now, the first thing you must do when considering any spirit of any nature is you must take into account and bear within your mind the fact that spiritual or essence, states of essence, and states of existence or state of the physical, there is no boundary or border between said things. Most people believe that there is a very distinct level of existence, and that they are separate, that you must travel from here to there, that you must make some kind of journey, or go through some kind of barrier or border, as I say. And that's simply not the case as such. The division between the spiritual and the physical realm is almost basically non-existent. It is simply changing the balance within yourself, or the spirit within itself, to a point where there is a shift in the equilibrium, in the balance of going from physical to spiritual. You become more of your you use more of your higher consciousness to detach yourself essentially from your body and simply merge with the world that coexists with our own. The spiritual and the physical world are not separate, but they are interwoven like a thread, or a rope made of many threads. It all weaves into one another. It's an interwoven pattern, and it's simply kind of, as I say, merging yourself or shifting yourself from here to the same place but in a different state. Now, once you understand that there really is no division, no border, no separation, or degree of separation in essence between ourselves and the spiritual, then you can begin to start to understand how certain spirits or creatures of spiritual beginning or origin or existence can exist within the physical world, at least for a short period of time. Now, most spirits that fulfill that category of being able to exist within the physical realm as well as their own spiritual existence also typically come under the category of fairies. Now, people misunderstand and have a complete misconception of what fairies are. They think of them as basically what are actually called piskies or pixies. Okay, these are a variation of fairy, but they're not the only type of fairy. Fairies originally the only fairy that pagans had an experience or knowledge of at the very beginning. Well, they had more, knowledge of multiple types, but the ones that they concerned themselves with the most and had the most experience with were those of almost an elven-like nature, the Devlin. Okay, these were an Subscibe. Okay, they're the same thing in essence, and these were basically human-like and human-sized fairies that were in essence the same as us in every way. They were just better than us. They were longer lived, they had a greater control of magic, they would tend to be stronger, faster, things like this. And so that is really what, in essence, fairies to the original pagans were, the Subscibe, as I say. But everything and anything that is of a spiritual nature that exists in the physical world and doesn't have a human origin is in essence a fairy. It's just a subcategory, it is just a category of of spiritual creatures that exist in the physical world. That is all it is. And then the subcategories, as I say, Subscibe, Piskies, gnomes, leprechauns, so on and so forth. So there are subcategories within that, and what I will say is trolls, goblins, all these kind of things, dwarfs, elves, they all exist within this category of fairy. Okay, there's the subcategories, that's all. Now, if it is not of human origin, it goes in that area. And then you have those that are of human origin, that is, spirits that exist in the physical world and have had some connection or an origin point with human existence. That is to say, in loose terms, ghosts, spirits, phantoms, whatever you want to call them. And these are what we call vards, okay, within paganism. Okay, vards are a sort of spiritual legacy, if you wish, left behind upon your death, that maintain a permanent connection with your physical remains. Even if you returned to ash because you have cremation, or over time you simply just rot away to nothing, you still have a kind of physical presence. Your physical essence is taken into the world. So you will always, forevermore, have a physical presence in this earth. You'll be incorporated upon other living things. And so at least where you died, or where your body was when it was buried and stuff like this, there will be a strong connection to your physical form for the rest of eternity. And this is typically where vards are, although they can be disconnected. And this is your most common haunting, if you wish, or most common experience of what we would in modern terms describe as a ghost, because it's those kind of things that you know, when you see a shadow in the corner of your eye and you swear you saw something in your doorway or behind you, that feeling that there's something there, or you see in the distance what you swear was a person, and when you get there, there's nothing there, no sign that anyone was there. These are the kind of experiences which you would associate with a vard. They have a physical presence, they can be seen, they have a manifestation, but unless you know what you're looking for, unless you can bring them forwards with certain summoning rituals and that, you will always only really see them as shadows here and there. You know, they are the ghosts. You know, they kind of flicker in and out of the ability of a normal person to be able to see and perceive them. We then have the spiritual vampire. Okay, this is almost a variation of the vard, but it is a vard. I mean, if you want to know more about vards, go see my videos that I've filmed on the sense of self, and I will do a video specifically on vards, also describing exactly what they are. But when it comes to vards, as I say, what they have within them in their base self is our own individual thought processes, our understanding, and our memory, but they do not possess emotion. Okay, they lack that modi aspect of our sense of self, and so they can only do so many things. They don't have ambition, for example, or desire, and so that's why they tend to hang around your body, because they've got no reason to leave it. Occasionally they will become separated, but they will always have that tether there regardless, and can be summoned back to the body or the remains of the body at will via someone who is practiced in necromancy, for example. But then there is, as I say, the spiritual vampire, which is almost like a vard, but a little bit different. A spiritual vampire is essentially a vard that has been possessed by the individual who that vard originated with. Okay, so during life, the vard is part of our soul, if you wish, our sense of self. It is so interwoven that it cannot be separated. and it is with us from birth, as I say, until death, and then it remains with our physical form whilst that of our conscious self, what we would essentially conceive in modern terms as our soul, then progresses to the afterworld. Okay, but the Vard remains, as I say, connected permanently to our physical self and is an echo of ourselves in essence, because it has our thoughts, it has our memories, as I say, it lacks our emotional response to things, but is a very good mimic of what we are. In fact, it is essentially ourselves just without the emotions. This is why commonly ghosts are often represented as being almost sad or emotionless, cold beings, because Vards, they don't feel sadness, but they don't feel happiness either. They're very almost robotic in that sense, and so this is why in modern conceptions of what is a ghost, you get this almost sad, morose aspect to them, because of course they, as I say, they don't have emotions, and it's a sort of an echo of our original knowledge of paganism that has kind of remained within modern society. However, as I said, there is the spiritual vampire, and the spiritual vampire, as I say, is where the individual who has their Vard is fully aware of their Vard and is able to use them within their life. So in Seder practice, for example, it is common to use your Filja, your animal companion, if you wish, to send them forth and exhibit your willpower, essentially, at a distance, using your Filja as a medium to bring about a certain effect. For example, if you want to send a message to someone, you can go into trance, send your Filja forth. Your Filja, being your animal companion, will go ahead and will, on a spiritual level, communicate with the person who is the target, for example, and will appear to them, obviously, usually in the form of your animal self, but within maybe their dreams or within their subconsciousness, and the message will then be directed to that individual. So Seder practitioners use Filjas to do such things, but there are those shamans who are very practiced in shamanistic practices related to the Vard, that use their Vard instead of their Filja. Now, there are certain advantages and disadvantages of doing this. A Vard is much less adaptable than a Filja. A Filja has its own personality, distinct from your own. It doesn't have your persona. It is a separate, individualistic, spiritual being that will exist after your death and will pass on and move on to another human being after you in time. Usually it will stay within your bloodline. But the Filja, as I say, is something that will not attend with you in your spiritual afterlife, and it doesn't remain with your physical body. It has its own personality. However, it is still a part of you, so much so that if it dies, then you die also. But it doesn't happen the other way around. If you die, it's not fully connected to you. It is its own separate individual state of existence, or essence in this case, in fact. But the advantage of using a Vard then is of a Vard, as far as I know, cannot be destroyed, and if it can be, and I have no idea how it would be, if it can be destroyed, it certainly wouldn't have a negative effect upon you as an individual. You are not dependent upon it like you are your Filja, and so this is why certain shamans use Vards, and say they're less adaptable because they don't really have. They're like robots, as I say. They will do exactly what you ask them to do, but they will not adapt to a changing situation, and they will not act any further beyond your instruction. So they're slightly more limited, but a lot safer to use. Now, those who are very practiced with the aspect of projecting your Vard, for example, something I have no experience of myself, by the way, but those who are can take it a step further and essentially almost possess their Vard and use it in the same way that you use your Hamria. Okay, so you use your Hamria, which is your spiritual self, essentially the vehicle that your consciousness possesses to travel the spiritual world. Okay, and it's your Hamya that you will exist within when you die and go to the afterworld. It's your Hamya is your spiritual body, if you wish. Okay, but people, as I say, are experienced with manipulating their Vard can get to a certain point, and it's very rare for anyone to get to this level. It takes a great deal of understanding and expertise, but you can possess your Vard in a similar manner as you would possess your Hamya. Now what this means is you then possess a spiritual vehicle, just like your Hamya is a spiritual vehicle, but one that exists in the physical world rather than the spiritual. And so you can have a spiritual presence and project your own spiritual consciousness and presence through that Vard, and experience the physical world and have the physical world experience you through that Vard. And what you do is you possess it, so it is you now. And you can send it out, and obviously because it has now your full thoughts, your full memory and your emotion, it is you. You can obviously it becomes fully adaptable to the level of however adaptable you are, and it is a way of almost essentially escaping death. This is why some people pursue this practice, because when you possess the Vard, you can remain within it for a permanent period of time. When your body, you can stay within it for as long as you want, and although your body will act as a tether and a source of energy for that Vardic possession, obviously eventually your body will die. If you don't go back to your body, you'll die of starvation or thirst, obviously, but if you temporarily go back to continue your body's maintenance processes, still eventually your body will die. We're all made of this world, right? And so we all age, we all die, and when your body dies, in essence, the physical form that was giving the energy to that Vard to survive with you in it, to maintain your consciousness, goes. And normally you would die, and your consciousness would be ripped out of the Vard if you died whilst possessing it, and would then go into an afterworld. However, those practiced in it can use their Vard to sustain their consciousness by absorbing the energies of those that are around that Vard at that point in time. And this is why it's called a spiritual vampire, because it will drain the spiritual energy of, if you wish, of the life around them to maintain the consciousness once the body has gone and left. And in fact, it can be done during life as well, to sustain your life beyond that which you would otherwise live, to maintain your body's vigor, but it only goes so far, obviously. But the shamans who do this will live off your presence. They will continue their existence through your presence, and it's that oppressing feeling that sometimes you get, if you've ever had it, where it feels like almost like a demon in the room. Now obviously pagans don't believe in demons, but it can be described as that, almost like there's a demon on your shoulder the whole time. You feel down, you feel lethargic, you feel an oppression, a spiritual oppression, as well as a physical one that you just seem to not be able to shake. And this, more often than not, is the presence of a spiritual vampire feeding off you. Now, this is another state of existence, as I say. This is a human originating spirit, just like the Vard. It originates with a human, but this time it is a person, but in the form of a Vard, a possessed Vard, if you wish. However, there are those spirits that, although you could categorize them under the aspect of a fairy, okay, that is a non-human spiritual presence that exists in the physical world, it fulfills that category. It is in essence its own category as well. It is, for me, separate from them, and the reason is such is that fairies all have the ability to physically manifest themselves in a manner that can be experienced by, say, you and I. Okay, they have the ability to have a very physical existence, to the point where you can have a full physical interaction, maybe a limited one, but still, nonetheless, you can have a physical interaction with anything that is categorized as a fairy. Whereas a land spirit is always a spiritual essence just on the physical plane, and so you cannot normally have a physical experience with a land spirit. You may have an indirect experience, i.e. they influence the physical world around you, but you'll never see them. You'll only see their effect, and that's why I define a land spirit to be something different to that of a fairy. Now, what is a land spirit? Well, really, if we jig that name around a little bit, we'll get our answer. A land spirit should be really, in my opinion, be known as a spirit of the land. It's the same thing. I've just changed spirit and land around in their order, but that's the point. It is a spirit of the land. It is something, a spiritual essence that exists because of the land around it, much like the spiritual vampire that feeds off people, off the spiritual essence of individuals like ourselves. The land spirit feeds off, or is sustained by. It's not a pariah. It's not a parasite. Okay, it lives off the energy, or is created by the energy of the life that is around it. And so a land spirit is just like a vard is tethered to a person's body and physical remains once that person dies. A land spirit is something that is tethered to a specific part of the world. That could be a tree, it could be a plant of some kind, it could be a river, a stream, or it could be just a whole region, like a wood, a forest, or and what I would say is that it can exist within urban areas as well. Now, how is that? Because we tend to associate land spirits and paganism and all the rest of it with areas of rural life. That's where we tend to really, in our own minds, associate the power of life existing, because that is life. That is obvious life, isn't it? Trees, grass, insects, birds, all that kind of thing, all coexisting. You can see how a land spirit would exist in that, because there's so much life flourishing, and that's true. You do tend to find land spirits mostly within wooded areas, for example, where there's whole types of life, different life forms existing and coexisting with one another, and so they will tend to exist in those areas because there's simply more life to give life to them. But you got to understand that from a paganist point of view, even inanimate objects, things that most people wouldn't concern themselves as being living, are living to a pagan. Rock is an inanimate object, and very few people would see that as a living form of another life form, in the same way that you would an animal or a plant to ourselves. But to a pagan, it is a piece of metal. Is from a rock. It is the same as a rock in essence. It's just a rock that's been altered by ourselves to produce some form of metal, like iron, steel, aluminium, whatever. It still is essence given physicality. Everything that exists within the physical world is essence given physicality. It is spirit in a physical form. We are all life, or magic as I would call it, given a physical form. We are all the byproduct of fate. And that is what magic is in essence. That is what life is. And so rocks and soil and things like this are still just as much life as we are. And in my beliefs, there is no hierarchy of life. Gods are not superior to us in the same way that we are not superior to animals, and the same way that animals are not superior to plants, and the same way that plants are not superior to inanimate objects. We're all just life given different form. And yes, of course, some are more capable of affecting fate and fulfilling fate than others. Gods are more capable of achieving certain things than we are, for example, because they have a greater grasp of, obviously, magic. They live a lot longer than us. In fact, they're immortal. That's the definition of a god. Cannot die of old age. And of course, we ourselves tend to be more self-aware than animals, although you could argue the other way, because a lot of the time in pagan beliefs, animals actually have a closer connection to the spirit world than us, as I discussed in my series on Britannic paganism in the form of totem animals. But that's that's really kind of going off the track now, the beaten track. Let's try to stick to what we're talking about. Not talking about the hierarchy of life, but what is a land spirit, okay? So a land spirit is something that is connected to anything that is living in essence, but it tends to associate itself with the life or the living spirit of the land itself. And so it will, in essence, possess, if you wish. I don't know if that's correct, but you could see it as this. It's one way of perceiving it. Possess a stream or a rock or a tree or as a wood, or as I say, is associated heavily with a certain aspect of land. Now, it doesn't possess them as such, but it kind of lives within them. But at the same time, it exists because these other things exist and give off life energy. And as I say, even in urban areas, our houses are made of brick, which come from the land, from the soil, from the rock. Everything we possess is either made of plastic or metal or wood. It all comes from the land. And so even in urban areas, you can get land spirits existing quite easily because, of course, we have just simply shaped the world around us, but it's still the world. Yes, we don't own it. It's just land given a different shape and form to what it originally had. And so even in urban areas you can get land spirits, okay? You can get land spirits because they're associated with the earth that is used in our homes, but it can also exist because they're simply, have been there since long before our homes were even built, and they're associated with literally the earth underneath us. Now, a land spirit, thus, is not something that is human in origin. It has never been a human. It's not a ghost. It's not a phantom or spirit in that sense that has come from a human. But it is something that is also different to that of elves and dwarfs, essentially, the fairies, okay? Because it is also not of Elfheim or Svartalheim. It is of Midgard, okay? It is of this world. And it was born of this world. It was born of Ymir, as we were, okay? And this is why it has both a physical and spiritual presence. The only things really that have both a physical and spiritual presence are those things that are born of Ymir. Okay, the gods themselves are purely spiritual. They can come to the physical world, but only through certain passageways. For example, where I know there's no barrier between life, between the physical life and the spiritual life in essence, but there is when you haven't got a tether, to work from. We are, because we are dual natures, spiritual and physical, can go to the spiritual realm through trances, for example, but the gods have never been of the physical realm. They have never been part of it, and so it's a lot harder for them to get here than it is for us to get there. They have to use things like the Bifrost, for example, to do so, or they have to possess a follower who's capable of holding their essence within them. So it's a lot harder for things that are pure spiritual nature, like the gods, for example, to exist within our physical world, but it is possible. There are ways. Where there's a will, there's a way. But land spirits, as I say, exist permanently within the world because they are of the world. They are of Ymir. The Vard is robotic, but the land spirits are not. They have their own distinct personalities in the sense that they are very territorial, very protective of the land that they are associated with. And this is where you can get some experiences with the land spirit as an individual. If you have a home that is in the area where a land spirit exists, then you are in theory encroaching upon their territory. And so this is why sometimes some hauntings, if you wish, I use hauntings in that kind of context, hauntings can be in fact land spirits that are simply just pissed off that you're around, okay, or simply excited actually that you're around. Say you are a pagan and you do have a knowledge of land spirits. It's a long time really since land spirits, land spirits have always coexisted very easily with pagans. We coexist with them. We understand what they are, so we don't fear them. But obviously the world's been modern religion for a long period of time, good 2,000 years. Pagans have been on the decline up to the current point in time where I think we're starting to make a comeback now. But pagans, because we understand the land spirits, we tend to attract them also. If we live within the area of a land spirit, we tend to more often than not have a positive experience with them, or they try to be positive. Now you may, if you have not got much experience with land spirits, may interpret what they're doing as being negative or maybe afraid of it, but don't be. Land spirits are rarely hostile with those who are willing to coexist with them. In fact, they can protect you, your family and your homes, in fact, to the degree that they can, because they can have an influence and an effect upon the physical world. They are born of the physical world. They are the spiritual life, if you wish. They are the persona. They are the mini, the modi and the hukra of the land itself. That's the best way of looking at them. They are the consciousness of the world that you live within, or your little bit of the world that you live within. And so, they can of course have influence upon the physical world because it is their world. It's their body in essence. The world, the land that they are born of is like our leak, our body to them, and so that when you look at it like that, you can see how they can have an effect on you. You may not be able to see them, but you can see their secondary effects. They do have a presence, and you can feel their presence also. That's the most important part, is that you can feel their presence, and they can almost communicate with you, not through words obviously, but through the same way that all spirits can communicate with you, through dreams or through your base consciousness. And as I say, for those who are unexperienced with such things, you can, you fear the unknown, obviously. But if you are having an experience with a land spirit, don't try to, exercise it or get rid of it or banish it in some way, because it ain't going to work. That land spirit's been there a lot longer than you have, and is connected to the land itself. You are living on its territory, okay, and it is letting you coexist with it. Now, don't get me wrong, as I say, land spirits can be hostile if you are transgressing and destroying something that they see as being part of itself and something not holy or anything like this, not spiritual to them, because it is a part of them. But if you are destroying, for example, an ash tree, for example, so a hawthorn tree that is typically often associated with spiritual beings, then it might then start being hostile towards you, out of revenge or just simply to try and stop you damaging what it doesn't want damaged. So you need to coexist with these things. And so in conclusion, what we see this is, in our state of existence, we have not only ourselves and our spiritual version of ourselves, we also have obviously all that is around us, not only being the plants and the other animals, for example, that exist, but the very world itself. We all have a spiritual aspect to us, and the world is no different. It is a living thing. Even the most inanimate of objects within this world will have some degree of spiritual presence, and these can collect in essence to form a spiritual manifestation, which is the land spirit. Okay. Now, obviously, we discussed at the beginning of the video that the other things that exist that are in this physical world and have a spiritual or are of a spiritual nature. Those, for example, the elves and the dwarfs of Svartalheim and Elfheim are essentially collectively described as, I say, the fairy. Okay, they were born of Ymir. They were the maggots that fed on the flesh of Ymir. Okay, and hence why fairies, okay, elves and dwarfs, typically are seen as living underground, because that is where they were born, within the flesh of Ymir, which is the earth itself. And then of course we have the other spiritual things that exist in this world but are of human origin, the Vad, and the Vad that has been possessed, which we would call in essence the spiritual vampire, which I call the pariah, but that's my own personal terminology. Feel free to use it or not to use it, but essentially that's ultimately what it is. It is essentially someone who was cheated death, if you wish. Well, physically hasn't cheated death, their body will have died, but have maintained a spiritual presence on this earth rather than travelling to the afterworld for whatever reasons they've done that for. Well, who knows? It would be, of course, it depend on the individual themselves, but they do exist also, although they are rare as a rocking horse shit. And it's rare that you will feel their presence, and if you do, it's possibly just a coincidence. It's not one of them, it's something else. It's your own emotions playing with your head most of the time. Now, what we're going to do is we'll end the video here, but we will continue with this discussion, and we will evolve these videos to include, for example, the sort of rituals, runes, for example, that you can do or use to experience or commune with the spiritual world or spiritual aspects of the physical world, and we will go from there. Okay, we will look at runes of protection. We will look at the rite of the high seat, for example, certain Seder practices, Gauda practices that can summon spirits, and of course we'll look at necromancy also. Something I'm not too experienced with, but something that I am learning for the purpose of teaching more than anything. I tend not to interact, so to speak, with the spiritual remnants of human beings. It's not something I like to do, but it's something that, of course, is useful to know, certainly at least from a teaching perspective. So I wish you farewell for now, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you very soon. Ta-ta. Bye-bye.